Come on! Shit! Hold on!
Still Wakes the Deep is a single-player, story-driven horror game developed by the Chinese Room, who are renowned for some of their prior releases, such as Everybody's Gone to the Rapture and Dear Esther. Two rich, story-driven games where there is very little for the player to do other than just walk around and absorb a rich story with a charismatic world and superb voice acting. Still Wakes the Deep, though, is a callback to the Chinese Room's days when they worked on Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs. Clearly, these are two very different genres, so I was curious as Still Wakes the Deep attempts to play both hands, and the challenge is to strike the balance between both a strong, focused story and engaging gameplay. Unfortunately, I don't think this was achieved. Still Wakes the Deep is set in 1975 on an oil rig in the North Sea off the coast of mainland Scotland. You take control of Cameron Kaz McCleary, a worker employed on the rig while his wife Suze and two daughters are spending Christmas back home. Right away, the game starts off in strong form. The world designers did a fantastic job by creating some convincing and thought-provoking spaces. The cabins in accommodation are tight and narrow, but packed with all the detail typical of someone who has to temporarily move their life away from home to work on an isolated rig out at sea. Just by entering some of these rooms, you can get a good idea of the characters who reside there before you ever talk to them.
Doesn't he surprise me? Prick.
The voice acting is at a high standard. The Scottish slang and banter between the crew is believable and intriguing. The opening stage of the game does a very strong job in building this world and crew in a really short space of time.
Just here to fix the lecky.
What do you think will be keeping the lights on if this place falls apart?
That's coal, you numpty.
The Chinese Room are incredibly talented in this department, and in previous games, such as Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, they did it with no visible NPCs and simply used audio recordings and environments to tell a story. With actual NPCs that you can interact with, it just takes it to a whole new level, so I was really impressed with how it all came together. I read in an interview with Rock Paper Shotgun and senior lighting artist Luke Norman that the developers really wanted to capture the feeling of dreich, a Scottish term used to describe the weather, typically when it's cold, bleak, and grey. This was clinically executed, and huge props to the team for achieving their vision here. After a meeting with the boss in which you cop a spray for a prior incident and ultimately get sacked,
Understand me?
Alright, why don't you just get on with it?
Don't you answer me back!
you go to board the helicopter to head home, but before you can, there is a loud noise and a sudden shift on the rig sends you overboard. You wake up after being rescued by your crewmates, having discovered that the drilling from the rig has awakened something sinister from the depths of the North Sea. Members of the crew are turning into horrific and grotesque monsters who are killing everyone on the rig, and it's littered with tangled deposits of a mysterious and unexplained substance, causing people to go insane and hear voices. This is where the horror begins, as you will creep, traverse, and sprint your way through cluttered corridors, maintain your balance at dizzying heights, and hold your breath in flooded passages. For just shy of 4 hours, everything will go wrong for Kaz and the crew on board. Faulty generators, rerouting gas lines, or finding the long way around a blocked path. If it sounds like something you've played before, it's because, truth be told, you probably have. This is where the initial charm from the first stage wears off, and Still Wakes the Deep just devolves into another one of those horror games. In terms of scares or tension, there really weren't too many moments where I truly felt terrified or daunted by the tasks that laid ahead. I wouldn't really call this a cat and mouse horror game, as there was no section in this game long enough to build any tension or fear of a specific threat. You see, there are often long periods of time where there is no threat whatsoever, and you are simply just walking around getting from A to B. Other times there are set pieces which involve you frantically sprinting, and then occasionally the game puts you in a situation where you have to turn a switch on, but a monster is patrolling one room. But once you flick the switch, you can just basically duck out of the room and all of the tension is largely wasted. It's like blowing up a balloon, and instead of popping it for the loud bang, you just let the air out. There were so many moments where I just had to get past a room and I could really quickly just sneak through it and leave without any issues or worries. I'm not asking for some clever AI or a constant threat the entire time, but I feel the pacing does not complement the gameplay, and in fact a lot of these elements sacrifice some of the other themes that Still Wakes the Deep attempts to convey. Make no mistake, I don't think Still Wakes the Deep is a bad game. I think it has some interesting characters, a few really great set piece moments, and a well designed world, but because the player has to engage in a very mundane and generic horror style format, there is less opportunity to flesh out the characters to their full capacity, less opportunity to really take in some of the great moments and art design that I mentioned earlier. And instead of feeling that drich that I mentioned earlier, I just felt I was on a treadmill going from A to B. One criticism of games like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture and Dear Esther is that there is no gameplay, that you just walk at a slow pace and listen to recordings without actually doing anything, and hence why some people label these games as walking simulators. I personally think that those games really exemplify why I consider games to be an art form. Because while I agree that the gameplay is boring, the story, characters, and themes I felt were so strong that when I finished the game and I sat down, I was able to reflect on what I just played. Those games provoked thought and discussion, and just like any good piece of art, there were plenty of people who liked it and plenty who didn't. Those games took a risk, and they didn't appeal to everyone, but there were plenty of people that were able to draw an emotional connection to the stories that were told. Still Wakes the Deep doesn't achieve this. Yes, there is more game to be played, with items you can pick up and interact with, as well as objectives to complete and people to talk to. You can do the classic throw an object over to the other side of the room to distract a monster, but none of that gameplay was memorable. And the story doesn't cause me to have any thought-provoking reflection or ask any questions. Sure, there were a couple moments with key characters that, again, thanks to some incredible voice acting, caused me to show concern, sympathy, and even hold out hope that everything will just work out. However, it isn't enough to stand on its own, and coming from a studio that I know has the ability to do this, I just feel making this kind of game did not give them the ability to put their best foot forward here. Just quickly touching on stability, I had no issues with my game achieving smooth frame rates of about 80 on epic and high settings with a 3080 Ti and an Intel Core i7. I did play it with film grain, motion blur, and chromatic aberration disabled, but if you want more of that cinema style effect, you can put it on. While I played on PC, the game is also available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and it will set you back $35. And for my Australian audience, you'll be looking at just over $50. I will add though that this is a day one Game Pass release, so if you have access to Game Pass, don't go forking out the extra cash. You can boot up your Xbox or PC and download all 9GB of this game at no extra charge. To sum it up, I really wanted to love this game, especially because I'm a huge fan of the developer's previous work, but all the elements that made those games memorable and sparked that awesome discussion appear to be dulled back here, and what comes in to replace that from a gameplay element is not strong enough to warrant that substitution. Still Wakes the Deep is by no means a bad game, and I think many will enjoy the brief 4-hour ride it takes you on, but for me, I just expected a little bit more from a studio I hold to a very high regard. If you've got your own thoughts, maybe you've played this game and you really enjoyed it, I'd love to hear what you've got to say in the comments section. I always like hearing other people's opinions. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you disagree with me. Regardless, I just love getting that discussion. So please don't forget to leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss another video. Lancey out.